All right, so tonight I'm going to be sharing some of my cards from my collection, and those are my cards that have to do with bicycling. And I've chosen some cards that show how the bicycle affected society in the postcard age. I was not initially a collector of bicycling postcards, even though I've been a cyclist for over 40 years. But like a lot of people, my original interest in postcards was around greeting cards. I noticed when even just looking at greeting cards that there were a lot of greeting cards that were showing a lot of the technological advances that were happening at the time that postcards were so popular. And even just the Santa Claus card, you can see Santa Claus is using a telephone and he's driving in a car and he's also riding a bike. You'll also see him in airplanes and airships. And so this time was a time of great technological advances. And they, even just in the 1870s, saw the invention of the telephone, typewriter, phonograph, and light bulb. And so you'll see these featured in the postcards. And so after a while, I started to see that the bicycle was featured in a lot of postcards, even in the topics that I was collecting. And I saw what a major impact that they were having. So eventually I did become a collector of bicycling postcards. And so just to give a little backstory on the bicycle, the precursor to the bicycle was called the Dracaene. And in 1817, a German inventor, Carl Drace, designed and built a two-wheeled wooden vehicle, and it was straddled, but you propelled it by walking swiftly. So it was like a kid's strider bike. And so it was very novel. It allowed people to go the fastest they had ever gone under, human power, but there were some drawbacks. It had a high cost. There was a lack of a practical value. Obviously on flat ground or going downhill, you could go fast, but going uphill, it was very heavy. And so it was not much more than an expensive toy. So here it shows you an actual Dracaene, and that's in the Smithsonian. And then on the right's an actual postcard, but it, is from the postcard age. And so it's showing the earlier Dracaene. Interestingly enough, it's showing a woman on the Dracaene. And like I said, it was mostly something that young men rode, not so much women. But then eventually somebody figured out how to put some cranks or pedals on this contraption, but they connected them to the front wheel. And so that was called the high wheeler, or also the penny farthing. And it was a dominant bicycle from the 1870s to the 1890s. And so as you can see, the front wheel went between somebody's legs, and they made the wheel larger because that could by making it larger, you could go faster with each rotation of the wheel, but you were limited with the leg length of the person riding it. And they were able to make the wheel larger because they had invented some steel spokes, and that made it light enough that you could make it larger. So these were very popular. On the left, there's an actual postcard from that age. And then on the right is a modern day postcard that I have that's probably more of, some poster art that occurred at that time. And so you see people are riding them in parks, and mostly you'll see them more on cabinet cards because, postcards were still relatively new. And so here are a couple cabinet cards showing these bikes and the riders. And so the bike had a very high center of gravity, and the forward weight bias made it pretty, difficult to ride. Obviously, it was very easy to fall forward over the handlebars. So it was, but they did a lot of, it still was very novel and very popular, and people rode them in tracks and did races. But you can see with these two modern postcards that are of illustrations, the ordinaries, which the ordinaries had wheel sizes a little closer together, They were mostly ridden by athletic young men. Women who rode them were considered hussies or freaks, or else they were in circus acts. So obviously, they were quite dangerous to ride. And so there was a tricycle that was built, and that was trying to capture the female market. But you needed 3 smooth tracks in the road instead of just one to keep them from tipping over. And the roads were still not in the greatest shape in the US, particularly. And so, but they were considered safer than the high wheelers. And they were able to stand by themselves. So women could mount them and accommodated women's skirts. And they were pretty popular actually in the UK. And around this time, John Boyd Dunlop was a Scottish inventor and a veterinarian, and he developed pneumatic tires for his son's trike because he was trying to make it smoother and faster for his child. And he was very successful. And so he saw how he could translate that into the bikes that were very popular at the time. And they became available for regular bicycles. And so finally, in 1885, the safety bicycle was introduced, and it started a bicycle craze, in America, but actually all over the world. And that craze peaked in the 1890s. So I have 2 real photo postcards here. One on the left, it's showing men with the safety bicycle, and you'll see that the wheels are smaller and they're the same size. It's got the triangular frame. And then a few years later, they introduced a frame with a drop frame so women could ride it, wearing the skirts. They didn't have to swing their leg over a bar. So the safety bicycle shifted the public perception of the bicycle from being a dangerous toy for sporting young men to being an everyday transportation tool for people of all ages. And so here's a Continental Pneumatic advertisement for the tires. And so the difference between the safety bicycle and the old high wheelers or penny farthings is they had the 2 thigh-high wheels, air-filled rubber tires, and then now instead of the cranks or pedals being attached to the wheel, it was had a rear wheel drivetrain where the chain transmitted the power from the pedals. And so what's kind of interesting about this postcard, people might wonder, well, how come she has her feet up? Well, the bikes, they hadn't developed coasting yet. And so it was what's called a fixed gear. So as fast as the pedals are rotating around, or the wheels are rotating around, the pedals are rotating at that same pace. So if you're going downhill, it's, kind of hard to keep your feet going around as fast as the wheels. So people would lift their feet up and then try to catch the pedals again as it leveled out. And this is interesting that she doesn't have her feet on the pedals or hands on the bar, which means her only contact with the bike is the saddle. So that's quite a trick because that would be pretty hard to steer, but it makes for a nice image. And obviously the people who are watching her are pretty amazed at what they're seeing. And so interesting, what I found very interesting when I started looking into the origin of the bicycle is that the brake was really not, that was considered an accessory. You could get bikes without brakes. And so we have 2 cards here that are advertising the Eclipse brake. And so we have a very happy man on the left. He's riding safely. He's got the brake. And then the lady on the right, well, she chose not to have an Eclipse brake. And so we can see what ended up happening to her. She ends up drowning. You can see how they are trying to get people encouraged to have brakes on their bikes. And so this is a later postcard, and it's for Bill's Gay 90s. And that was a restaurant that tried to recreate this nostalgic time period of the Gay 90s. And so I think it's interesting because the card shows you that they've got horse-drawn carriages, horse-drawn trolleys, they've got a bicycle. And so what you don't see are cars yet. And so trains and automobiles, streetcars, they were starting to grow in use, but people mostly depended on horses for transportation. Well, of course, they were expensive to own, especially in the city. And so when bicycles became available, they were an affordable alternative for individual transportation. And so you can see this, there's this collection that I was able to finally, I think I have the complete series, shows you men riding bikes in a lot of the major cities in Europe, and then even in Asia, and even some towns in Africa. And so you can see by this, it really was a worldwide phenomenon. And these are all men, but there are also postcards showing women on bikes, I guess in the countries that were allowing women to ride. And so these are all with native costume on. And you'll see the bikes, you'll see here that the back wheel has some a guard, and her bike has it too, to keep the long skirts from catching into the workings of the bicycle. And then here on the right, you have the notation, a Bombay scorcher. Well, I think they're trying to be cute and say, you know, it's an attractive woman, a scorcher. But scorcher was a term used for some of these early cyclists. And it was mostly young men who were actually racing around and not being very careful about, pedestrians. And you get a lot of postcards showing them crashing into people. And so you have also this notation down here, 6 pence an hour. So I think that's referring to there were a lot of bikes for hire at this time for people who couldn't afford to buy one. And this is a Tom B card, Tom Brown, and he produced a lot of bicycling postcards, mostly humoristic comic cards, and also in series. And so there are a lot of postcards, a lot of them comical, but of crashes, people crashing into pedestrians and into each other, and cyclists crashing into each other. And I always enjoy it when I can find a card where the back of the card refers to what's happening on the front of the card. And so this person sending the card does say he hired a bicycle, he rented a bike, and he knocked a perambulator, a walker over, said, yeah, but no worse by me. So everything turned out all right. But this kind of shows you that all this early cycling, a couple of things. Well, they were sharing the space of the people walking, and probably there weren't a whole lot of rules yet about who's supposed to be where. And then maybe also a skills problem, especially if people are renting bikes, maybe they're, not very skilled yet. And so we do have quite a few crash postcards. Like I said, here's some more here's another Tom B card. And crashing into things, well, especially if they don't have any brakes, you might anticipate that, crashing into each other. So without the brakes, how you were expected to stop yourself was to put back pressure on the pedals or just jump off the bike and stop. And so here's a couple of cards from a series with crashes. And then, of course, we have women getting into mishaps with bicycles. And of course, that's always, if it's women, a chance to get a little risque and show a little skin or underclothing. So got a couple of those here. And so at this time, with bicycling being such a new thing, doctors were divided about cycling. A lot, believed that it could cause maladies such as bicycle hand or bicycle face, or even, just standard illnesses, scoliosis, TB, heart conditions. So there was a lot of wariness of, about the unknown of the bike. And I think these three cards are kind of interesting because it's showing women crashing into people, and yet they don't look too remorseful about it. Some of them look like maybe they might have even done it on purpose. So maybe these cards were trying to show the the possibility of, bicycling causing insanity. And then there are, of course, a lot of cards that mock women learning to ride. But the woman cyclist was really, they really were trying to get that market. Women were interested in cycling. And so the merchants were motivated to make it so that they would feel comfortable getting a bicycle. And they often provided cycling academies that were held away from onlookers so that they, could learn to ride without intimidation. And so, of course, this all being something very new, you're going to have cards that are focusing on, oh, now now we're having contact because women have to learn how to ride. And, we're going to have physical contact that, wasn't necessarily happening before. And the card on the left, well, that's a nice card that could almost be a Valentine's Day card. We've got a little, Cupid up here in the tree. But then the card in the middle, it's like, oh, a lot of trepidation going on here. And maybe some of this physical contact is not exactly knowing what's going on, but these two look a little happier here. And then these cards, this one is saying, oh, this beginner, oh, when you're falling, just cling to me tight. It's all in the lesson, it's all copacetic. Everything's all right with it. Nothing wrong here. And so this card is showing that, well, that's another way to have a romance starting. And so society was changing from the rural to city living, and people had more leisure time, and they were engaging in all these new activities that were coming to the forefront: tennis, golf, and cycling. And so you start to see that in a lot of the postcards too. And a lot of the artists were making postcards that were showing people engaging in bicycling. On the left, we have Raphael Kirchner, probably familiar with that artist. And then on the right is Hohenstein. And so we've got some back view of people on bikes and even a couple on a tandem. And so at this time, moralists were warning that skimpy costumes and unsupervised travel would lead to wanton behavior. And immodest bicycling by young women is to be deplored. And that's a quote from Charlotte Smith, and she was a founder of a women's rescue league. So of course, you're going to see some postcards that are in that vein of, warning against what can happen out there unsupervised, unchaperoned. And so these manners mavens were urging the unmarried women to cycle with chaperones, but that rule didn't take. New mores were being established to match these changing times, and women cycling without a chaperone was generally becoming accepted because there was comradeship in the bicycling set. They looked out for one another. They cycled in groups. On the left, there's a card. They're actually a group cycling at night. And then on the right, you can see this big group has stopped at a cafe or whatever. Anyway, then you see some cards where they are showing that people are meeting up, and then that's how they're finding their marriage partner. And so sociologists postulated that the bicycle improved the gene pool because people were finding partners outside of their own little small towns, and it kept them from marrying their cousins. And so we'll get to that marriage part. The card on the left is actually a repro, and it's showing a couple leaving their wedding on a tandem. I don't know how often that happened, but tandems were also very popular at this time, and you'll see them in advertising. This Continental pneumatic advertisement is for Continental tires. And it's kind of humorous because it's showing the woman, looks like she's having to pump up the calves of her partner there on the tandem. Also, it harkens back to that song that you're probably familiar with, Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer true, you'll look sweet upon the seat of a bicycle built for two. So that a song from those times tells you that it was a popular bicycle. And so then there were questions about the propriety of how to ride a tandem. And does the lady go in front? Because, you know, should she have to look at the man's back and ladies first? But for practical reasons, it's actually probably better for the man to be in the front because it takes up her arm strength and he has to do the steering. So you'll see both, but you probably see more real photo postcards with the man on the front. And so then they made rules for ladies on the bicycles. Don't ride without gloves. Don't wear flaming colors in your hat. Don't ride a tandem on a Sunday except with a male escort. So changing times. And this is, like I said, here's a real photo postcard, and there's a little tandem over here. And indeed, you'll barely see the man in front, but it does look like the woman is on the back. And so here are a couple of illustrated postcards showing, you know, more than a two-person bike, three, and it has just women on it. And of course, we have a man who's very shocked here, a great Scott. And so the Minneapolis Tribune opined that two women on a tandem were an invitation to every rude man to make insulting remarks of a personal nature. So, you know, there was still some resistance for women, you know, getting out there and being seen and being out in public. We have this ad here. This is a French ad, and it's showing a whole family on a multiple person bicycle. I haven't seen a lot of real photo cards of families on bikes like that, but it's a cute picture. And then just getting out and cycling actually was a way for families to do things together, and it helped keep father out of the saloon, which actually was, you know, a problem at this time, social problem. So here's more of a real photo of a multiple person bicycle, and they did have those, and they were for a lot of exhibition riding and for, you know, advertising. Like in this case, it's for tires. And so, you know, they were exotic and attracted interest. And so then there are some humoristic cards with some contraptions here involving the bicycle that I don't know how realistic these are anyway, but I think, you know, they were mostly used to, you know, make a comical commentary on the burdens of large families on the father. And of course, there was not really any family planning at the time. So, you know, people did end up with large families, and there was cards that poked fun about that. Here is a more real photo, well, real photo on the left that did show where somebody could cycle, and somebody would be sitting in a chair and they were pushing it along with cycling. And then the one on the right is just showing the woman as a, you know, suffrage way of a change. The woman gets to pull the man. And so bicycles at this time, they came to symbolize the quintessential new woman of the late 19th century. And so we have positive imagery in this card on the left, women of the times. And then a lot of women were having their photographs taken in studio with a bicycle. And actually, Susan B. Anthony, who was quite an elderly lady at this time, she had started advocating for women's right to vote way back in 1848. So she's quite elderly. She wasn't riding a bike, but she says, "Let me tell you what I think of bicycling. I think it's done more to emancipate women than anything else in the world." And so that was real eye-opening to me. And so women, this is all, you know, pre the car being, you know, something that was every day. Women were using the bike to able to organize and go to their meetings. And though I don't have any suffrage cards where they're actually on the bike doing pro suffrage work, I look at these ladies and I think they're all business, and I can very easily accept the idea that that's what they might be out there doing. And this is a British card, and you can see the men on the right. They're all of them are looking over at these ladies. So it's still kind of a new novel thing. And I like to think they're out there going to their suffrage meeting. And since the women wouldn't win the right to vote until 1920 in the US, these unchaperoned, self-propelled women seem to be pedaling in the right direction. And then you start to get the cards that mock women for being out there on the bicycle, because there was a social resistance to it. The Victorian era had created the cult of domesticity, the belief that men and women functioned in different spheres, and the women's sphere was in the home. And so woman cycling blurred the line between femininity and masculinity and the roles. And I can't remember if this is a Dutch card or German. I tend to think it's Dutch, but loosely translated, this is a new sport, and men it's futile to resist. And so then you get some really disparaging ones. They get pretty bad. And then we get these ones where she's on the bike, but of course they made her basically look almost indistinguishable from a man. And then, of course, Darwin's theory of evolution. We're going to use Darwin's evolution to change a cockroach into a woman cyclist. And then the woman leaving the home on her bicycle, abandoning the man to take care of the children, that was a very common anti-suffrage trope in postcards as well. And so, well, I'll just go back to this. You'll notice the outfits that the ladies are in leaving on their bikes. And so in 1851, Amelia Bloomer, she was an early advocate for women's dress reform. And because, you know, the clothing, the tight corsets, the heavy gowns, they were very unhealthy. And there was an outfit designed by Elizabeth Smith Miller, and Bloomer showed it in her magazine, The Lily, but it became known as the Bloomer costume because of the Amelia Bloomer was, it was her magazine, and she also sported the outfit. But any women who wore it were basically ridiculed in the press and harassed on the streets. So it didn't become very popular. But when women started taking to the bicycle, well, the popularity of the bicycle triggered changes in women's dress that these previous health conscious advocacies couldn't do. So they were going to ride the bike, and they were going to be comfortable doing it. And so you'll see in the cards, these cards show some of the women in a bloomer-like costume, like the one up here on the left. And of course, all these men are like, oh, awestruck. What is that? And then some are wearing just, you know, modified outfit, a shorter skirt, you know, a longer skirt. Of course, their feet would get caught in the hem of it, you know, when they pedaled around. So they had to have a shorter skirt. And then these gals are in the bloomer outfit. And so this translated not just to writing, but also to general fashion. There were other stressors placed on women's fashion changing. Women were working in factories, and so they couldn't have all this voluminous clothing. It was getting caught up in the machinery. But you'll see that bloomer outfit was kind of translated into just general fashion. Got some loose trousers with a tunic over it. And then I love this French card that I have. It says the skirt culotte, the jupe culotte is and this is the entrave, that's the hobble skirt. They're both very late. Well, she's late because she can't get to the trolley, and then she's the latest fashion. And so here now we have men on the bicycle. And the 19th century, it was, you know, believed that physical energy was a finite resource, and it needed to be carefully parceled out, not something that, you know, could be renewed after exertion. So we have a comical card here, how to train the husband. We'll get it heavily insured and then make it cycle to business every day. So, you know, it's kind of suggesting that he's not going to make it. And he's an upper class businessman because he's still got his top hat and his top coat, which is not very practical for riding to work. Lower level people working in offices wore suits that were closer to suits that we see today with shorter jackets. Anyway, the 1880s saw an increase in organized physical activity, baseball, football, and cycling. And so you're going to see those in these, that they're going to have their bicycles in their studio cards, and also showing the different, uh, games and that were happening at that time, running, playing cricket, basketball. And so the cyclists were showing improved muscle tone, strength, better sleep. So this was all empirical evidence of cycling's positive effects, and that was starting to outweigh all the warnings about adverse effects. Early on, cyclists were members of clubs. So usually they just mostly exclusively male members, and they had uniforms, and they were simple, light, and less restrictive than regular clothing. And then that they actually had uniforms. The one thing that people were resistant to were the short pants, knickerbockers, but they were, American men scoffed at that, but they accepted them as more radical. And so then later, you actually see them changing over to these more cycling attire. And so bicycle clubs quickly formed a political agenda. They had to fight for a place to ride. Police were prohibiting them from riding in the streets. And so the League of American Wheelmen was formed, and it started to organize to advocate for laws that would make it safe for wheeling and give them equal access. But, that was, part of why they didn't want them riding in the streets, is because the horses were easily spooked by bicycles. And of course, we still had a lot of horses out on the roads. And so you can see this New York card. We've got a lot of bikes and we still have horses. And then here's a Paris card. It's, it's staged, but it's showing some level of animosity here between the carriage and the cyclist. And so there was less resistance to bicycling in Europe. There were better roads, made it easier. And the lack of a European patent made bicycles more profitable to make. That a lot better infrastructure. Here's the metro over here. You can see there's a little cycling shop. Here's the inside of a cycling shop. You see a lot of cycles in the street here. But there was also some times where areas like in Paris where they weren't letting bicycles ride because it was just so popular that, there were run-ins and confrontations. But in Europe, water shedding technology advances, such as crushed stone pavement, made highways more usable in any weather. So you see a lot of cards of people cycling out in the country. These are a couple of German cards. But in the US, the infrastructure wasn't as good. Federal and state governments took no responsibility for road building. Taxes were levied on city properties to maintain the streets. But out in the country, farmers were responsible for maintaining the country roads, and their road taxes were calculated in days of labor. And so farmers would work a day or two a year to maintain the roads, and they were not very thrilled to do that. And so they were not maintained very well. And so the cyclists, they wanted to have better roads to ride on. And so the League of American Wheelmen convinced farmers it was in their financial interest to have better roads. And so they worked together to lobby the government to fund rural road construction, and they were eventually successful. And not only did better roads benefit farmers and the cyclists, but once roads improved, postal delivery expanded to rural areas in the US. This is not a bicycling postcard, but it's one of the few that I have that says rural free delivery. And of course, they're just being silly about the fringe benefits of rural free delivery. And so these are European cards, and they're for Continental Pneumatic. But as the roads improved in the US, cyclists explored the towns in between the train stops, and that led to increased businesses in these little small towns. And actually, eventually, led to the development of, helped lead to the development of suburbs. And so in Europe too, the popularity of cycling helped to create cycling specific businesses. This card is actually French Chalet du Cycle on the Bois de Boulogne, and that's a bike rental chalet. And then you have a Hotel des Sports, and that is, caters to people that are out doing bicycle touring. And so these are modern day postcards, and they're just, of photographs from the time period. And the police, they had to adapt to the bicycle being a new mode of transport because there was a getaway bicycle before there was a getaway car. And so the police needed to be able to keep up and catch the perps. And so this is kind of an interesting advertising card for biscuits. And then there's a story about a daring escape from bandits on his bicycle. And well, he actually has a gun too. But anyway, so, they were used by telegram delivery boys. And here's a couple of postcards that making the postcards seem like a telegram. This card is from a series that I have of women actually during the war working on the home front and doing the jobs of men. And it's showing women delivering papers on a bike. And then I'm not sure if this guy's a policeman or what he is, but I just thought he looked very dashing in his uniform and with his bicycle. And so another place where bicycling affected what was going on at that time, many mass production methods associated with the automobile industry, they were first employed by bicycle makers. And so instead of bikes being assembled one at a time, the factory workers were using those time-saving division of labor techniques and machine tools cranked out uniform parts that workers then assembled into the components of the bicycle. And bikes were so popular that there were even whole factories that just, were making parts that went on the bicycle, wheels and spokes and things like that. And then even the Wright brothers were affected by the bicycle because they capitalized on the bicycle craze. They opened a bike shop in 1892, and they began making their own brand of bicycle in 1896. And then they used those proceeds to fund their interest in flight. And so here you see this contraption. They made this before they made a wind tunnel. And so they were using the bike basically as their wind tunnel to work on some experiments about lift basically, and testing the effect of air pressure on flat objects. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. I'm sorry about this image here. I did buy this postcard because it is a Wright Brothers plane, but it hasn't come in the mail yet, so I had to use the screenshot that was available to me. And then this looks a little bit more like what we're used to seeing for those early airplanes. And so the bicycle ushered in the beginning of a consumer culture. Manufacturers took advantage of the bicycle craze with planned obsolescence. They made all kinds of accessories, and they had all kinds of catalogs where you could order these things. And it was always something new and improved products. And a lot of the times it wasn't even that much different from the previous year's model, but everyone at this time was keeping up with the Joneses. So, that's how they kept selling their goods. And the magazine revolution was happening at this time. And so it was bankrolled by advertisers. And the bicycle was portrayed as a portal to a world of adventure and freedom. And some ads didn't even show a bicycle at all. Instead, it was just a goal to create a mood. So some of these images are pretty iconic. You've probably seen these. These are all reproduction. And I think they're reproduction of poster art. I don't know that these were necessarily ever postcards, but an artist who did actually make postcard art of bicycles for advertisement was Alphonse Mucha. and he's one of the more notable artists. And this is a reproduction because his cards are very expensive if you can find them, but very beautiful. Usually it's women, and like I should go back here, notice how it's all women. And they really were capitalizing on trying to get the female market. They knew guys were going to buy them, but they really wanted to get those female buyers. And so, you do have, these are actual postcards that I have showing different bicycles that you could buy. And a lot of the imagery is very attractive artwork. And then you have the accessories. You've got the comic card here for the tubes. And this is well, it's saying these are the jewels of the cyclist, and that's pretty true. All the componentry is, that gets them very excited to have very nice componentry. And this is a liniment oil for your sore muscles. And so this card is for tubes, and they are at the water trough here because they've gotten flats, punctures, and they put it under the water to find the hole so that they can fix the flat. And over here, he's got a great night light, and he's coming across this guy who's crashed because he did not have a night light. And so there were lots of exhibitions and acts of daring do, and probably one of the best known ones is the looping the loop the loop. You'll find a lot of postcards, and that was, how they were doing that at state fairs and exhibitions. They'll also show up. This is, this is a political card, and it's probably, I don't know who this politician is, but it's probably poking fun at him at the tricks that he can do. And then there was also the cage of death. And so there were they were really trying to push the envelope for what they could do with the bicycle. And they showed up in a lot of circus and acrobatic acts. This is an actual postcard. I don't like to see cards where they're using animals, but they did. And then on the right is an image I took of poster art for the circus. And the circus would, when it came to town, it would be accompanied by a lot of pageantry, and they would show new things, novel inventions and so forth. So that got the word out and showed people this new invention, the bicycle, and got people interested in it. And so then when we moved to the military, the US military didn't really see a tactical role for the bicycle. That's probably because, we didn't have a lot of countries that we were right next to, that we were having friction with. But in Europe, it was a different story. And so many countries in Europe included cycling soldiers, acted as couriers, scouts, gophers, and spies. And even up to, these are World War I postcards, some military equipment was still being moved by horsepower. Automated vehicles were still, somewhat hard to come by. Some artillery guns were pedaled into position by four-wheeled bike-based carriages, though. So we're still using horses in World War I. But Italian commanders used cyclists as messengers in field maneuvers. They were useful in stealth missions. The French and Russians also built folding bikes. And so in a lot of ways, they were, they were more practical than horses. And then this is a German card, and translated, it says it can't get any higher than that. And I just noted that, you've got your lowly, infantrymen riding the bike, but of course you still have your officers on the horse. And then they even had them in this advertisement for the Burr tonic, showing military. It was a quick way to move troops around. And then we come to bicycle racing. I, could do a whole program just on bicycle racing, so I'm just gonna kind of do a little quick overview on racing and the cards. So we have some very nice cards associated with bicycle racing to promote different races. You had bicycle companies and journals that promoted racing because, of course, that was another way to keep people interested in buying bicycles. And so probably the most famous American pro racer at that time was Marshall Walter Major Taylor. He was an American professional bicyclist, but obviously was African American. And so he did most of his racing in Europe because he faced racism in the US, and there were a lot of races that they wouldn't let him race in. And even by today's standards, he's probably considered the greatest American sprinter of all time. So he did a lot of track racing. One of the oldest long distance road races is called Paris. And that was the first one was in 1891. And this race was a test to prove the reliability of the new safety bicycle. And the riders had to carry their own food and water, rode the same bicycle for 1,200 kilometers, and it was sponsored by Le Petit Journal newspaper. And the winner was Charles Tarrant. This card is actually because he was riding on Michelin tires. This is a tile, one of the tiles of many of the cars and auto races and bike races that were won on Michelin tires. And this is one of the copy of one of the tiles. And then this is a modern postcard of poster art for Paris. And it is actually, it still occurs, but it's no longer a pro race. It's for amateurs, and it's held every 4 years. And this is a ride that actually my husband has done 4 times. And so now we get to the biggie, the Tour de France. That's an annual multiple stage race. It was first organized in 1903. The roots of the Tour de France trace back to the establishment of the newspaper L'Auto, the car, and that's to rival the largest sports newspaper at the time, Le Vélo, the bike. And so there's an interesting backstory to why it was created. The journal L'Auto was started after disagreements over the Dreyfus affair. And Alfred Dreyfus was an army officer who was convicted of treason for selling secrets to the Germans. And France was very divided over his guilt or innocence. Émile Zola wrote J'accuse, I accuse, and it was an open letter to the president of France accusing the government of anti-Semitism. Many believed Dreyfus had been framed and he was being persecuted because he was Jewish. Then there was a change in the presidency in 1899 that led to a review of the case, and then that led to a release of Dreyfus from the penal colony. And so there are a lot of postcards about this because it was a very big deal and it divided people. And like I said, it divided these 2 people who were involved in in racing. And so Pierre Giffard, editor of Le Vélo, was pro-Dreyfus. Comte de Dion, he was the founder of an auto company. He was anti-Dreyfus. Due to their disagreement, Giffard stopped writing about Dion cars in his paper Le Vélo, and that was decreasing de Dion's sales because they couldn't advertise in Le Vélo. So he decided he'd start his own journal, L'Auto. But it wasn't it wasn't as profitable. So they planned the Tour de France to increase the readership, and they wanted a race that was different from all others to, really gin up the interest. And this postcard has L'Auto as L'Auto Velo. That was its original name, but then they were sued and they had to drop the Velo part of their name and became L'Auto. And so the tour was stage races. So what that meant was every time they raced, there would be a winner of that particular race, but then they would keep a cumulative tab of the overall time, and then there would be an overall winner. So it was 6 monstrous stages, and it covered 2,428 kilometers. Some of the stage races went overnight across rough, unpaved roads, and riders rode without team support. Now, some of these cards are very recent addition to my collection because I found a dealer that had these very early cards. I don't know that I have any quite from 1903. I'll have to do some more research. Maybe this one. This one is in the book, a book I have about the Tour de France, and it shows this card. But my postmark says 1907, but maybe it got produced earlier. But as you can see, the people were, lining up to see these stage races, and it garnered a lot of interest. And so this is one of the starts, and I think one of the interesting things to point out is that these guys, they had to be pretty self-sufficient, so they carried their extra tires around their necks, and they didn't have a lot of support out on the road. And the race ran from July 1st to the 19th. The stages went through Montgeron outside of Paris, through Lyon, Marseille, Toulouse, Bordeaux, Nantes, and ended in Paris at Parc des Princes. And the winner was Maurice Garin. He was the pre-race favorite. And he won the first stage, retained the lead throughout, won the last two stages, and was ahead by 3 hours over the next finisher. So a lot of these cards that I have are from 1910. So like I said, sometimes it's hard to tell if the cards weren't sent exactly what year they're from. I'd have to do a little research. But anyway, I just love having them. And these, show their outfits and their bikes, and they look like some pretty hardy fellows there. And like I said, each day there was a winner. So this shows some of the winners of the actual races for each stage. They had to go over some mountains. You can see the ruggedness of the terrain. There's some snow, and then little buildings and places to stop were few and far between. And this is back in the towns. When they come into the towns, they're riding over the cobblestones. This one is showing the dust coming up from the peloton rolling in, and all the people that are lined up to see them coming into the towns. They have to sign in to control stations. And this is like what we would call today a feed zone. They come here getting their replenishment. And I think it's interesting, they mostly drank things like wine and cider because, the water wasn't necessarily good and could make them sick out on the roads. And so the circulation of the Loto increased more than sixfold during and after the race. So the race was considered successful enough to run again the next year. They did have rest days, and so this is a car transporting some of the riders on a rest day. Here it looks like they're having to wait for a train. Nowadays they close roads and trains are elevated, and that's not an issue. There were colorized postcards. Dignitaries showed up and sees them helping the riders coming into one of the towns. And then they show individual riders. And so the Tour de France lifted road racing above track racing in the race hierarchy. It changed the race audience from an urban phenomenon to France's sport, because it became hugely popular even in the smallest village in the countryside, because they would change which towns they would ride through year to year. And so that was a big thing for any town when the Tour de France came through your town. And it was the beginning of the athlete as the, superstar. And they, of course, did advertisements for products. And these aren't these same guys, but I think it's funny because it looks like they could easily be caricatures of those three guys. And then by the turn of the century, the bike craze was over. People, still raced and people still rode bikes to work, but automobiles became more plentiful by 1910, and people became more fearful of riding in the traffic, and fatal crashes actually became shockingly common. And you can see from these two cards, this is a USA card, you've got everything, every conceivable transport to get to the fair. And then even down here with this Paris card, you've still got the horses, you've got the bikes, you've got automobiles. So it looks potentially chaotic and maybe, yeah, dangerous, more dangerous for the bicyclist. Bicycles were a vehicle that women used to liberate themselves, both from constrictive clothing and also politically. It provided statistical evidence that improved health, and so that helped move and science and medicine to an empirical model for diagnosis and treatments. It made the American car culture possible with the early development of mass production techniques, and it began to lay the groundwork for an interstate highway system. And it had shown people the possibility of independent long distance travel. And that is it. Stop my share.
There you go. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I had to unmute myself. I'm sorry about that. Appreciate it so much, Lauren. You did a great job.
Oh, thanks.
Anybody, please unmute yourselves. If you have any questions that Lauren might be able to answer, please feel free.
Hello. I just wanted to mention about last winter when I was in New York City with my sister for music theater productions there. We saw several times messenger young guys on bicycles, and they would go from like one law office to another office. They would have kind of a satchel or like a saddlebag, like you might have, but with
Uh-huh.
papers and things that they would be delivering. Or I saw them at restaurants, getting food or pizza to take to somebody else to deliver, but all by bicycles
Uh-huh.
in the streets and on the side. Well, I think more in the streets, but it was cold and we were walking a lot of the times. And then to think of being on that, they just had their gloves right on the handlebars. So they just pull out their hands and go inside and come back and you know
Oh, that's hilarious.
yeah, it was. It made me wonder and wish that, if you lived there, you could do a whole series of postcards of these
Guys.
modern bicyclist
Yeah.
guys. I'm sure you would make some friendships and it'd be fun. Be neat.
I wonder how many of them are using e-bikes now,
Now,
if
what is an e-bike?
electric bike. Yeah, did you
I don't
notice?
know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not the world's greatest on transportation, knowing what I'm seeing. But thank you.
You'll,
It was a
you'll
great
find out.
program.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
That's a
Well,
wonderful collection of cards, and I think you should publish a book on your collection of bicycles. I think.
Well, yeah, yeah, I don't know. It's one thing putting a program together, a whole nother thing doing a book, but
Huh.
yeah, I've been really excited to find those Tour de France cards. That to me was like um, you know, a great find. Yeah,
I agree.
yeah.
It's wonderful. I like the ones that you had earlier in the presentation. The group of guys writing, it was various locations in Europe. I thought that set was really neat. That was a nice collection, and I'm glad you got all of them. That's wonderful to hear.
But about your tires and the pneumatic things and all of that, the headlight, and you just have just so many pieces there that really makes a dynamite story.
Yeah.
Great, great.
Well,
I love
both my husband and I have been cyclists, going way back. And so it's, I guess, having just knowing what's
Sure.
involved and just even, well, it's been fun doing the research because, you know, bikes, the technology is so advanced now. And then just to learn things like, what, the brake was an accessory? What, you're kidding me. Yeah, that kind of stuff really amused me.
Well, I thought the interesting, one of the many things that you mentioned that was interesting to me that I never realized, of course, was when that one postcard you had where the woman had her legs up, uh, and because the pedals were going faster than she could keep up with. I never thought about that. I always thought it was geared somehow, but obviously back then there was no gearing.
No, and some people do choose to ride fixed gear nowadays. But, you know, I don't know. It's a little bit eccentric, but people do choose to do that. So they don't have brakes. You brake, you know, with your pushing back on the pedals, and it's just one gear. And so some people are pretty adept at it, but just even learning about gearing. So these guys in the early Tour de France, each day they had to decide on the terrain what gear they were going to ride in for the whole day. Or they could put a gear on the other side of the wheel and flip the wheel around and ride that. But pretty much they, you know, they had a choice of like one gear. They could spin the gear on for that day that they thought would be the best gear for them to race in. And then eventually they developed the derailleur and multiple gears, but even that you had to stop and pull the chain up and stick it on the different gear until eventually they developed something where it would switch the gears while you were continuing to ride. So it's pretty interesting.
It absolutely is. When was the derailleur invented? Do you have any idea about that?
Yeah, I looked that up a little while ago, and I think it was right around 1890 or maybe in the 1880s. But like I say, it was very rudimentary. You know, this bar lifted the chain up and stuck it on a new gear. So it really wasn't in use. And even up until I think it was the 30s where it was actually something that was you could keep the legs going around and it would do it automatically without having to stop and do something kind of manually. Yeah.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Whenever there's a problem like that, people always manage to come up with a solution, which is great in itself, right?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
any other questions or comments? Hey, Joe, go ahead.
Hi, Lauren, great job. Really, really great presentation. So
Yeah.
interesting. And going on a couple of points, I really appreciate what Hal said. There's so much that you can take off on this, you know, and all the components and everything is very interesting and mass assembly. I do know nowadays with the younger generation, I'm around middle schoolers and high schoolers a lot. A lot of that crowd like the fixed gear. They're riding those bikes now. They call them fixies.
Right.
You know, I don't
50s.
know what it is, but they're really onto those now. And I'm always laughing with these kids because they don't have brakes on them, you know, they have the back brake, you know, or whatever, but you know, they make it work. Um, Another thing what's interesting, I work with a coworker and she has a couple of these bikes. They're Italian bikes and they're $10,000 bikes. Multi-gear bikes, you know,
Mhm.
really top of the line bikes. I don't know the companies or anything, but I mean the best in the world pretty much. I would think that, you know, some of that she has. What would be interesting if you're into this is to maybe see if those companies now make postcards for advertisements. I wonder if those newer companies make postcards, you know, in some way to collect those. Those
Yeah.
might be out there.
We both my husband and I ride high-end bikes too. Um, I haven't um I haven't actively looked for modern cards, but I other than you know, like cards for specific races like the Tour de France, you know, the teams will put out postcards. I have some, you know, more modern cards of the teams and things like that. Not so much advertisements for the bikes, mostly like, you know, the famous racers and stuff, put out some postcards and team cards. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Though. Very
Yeah.
I'll say
Yeah.
one more thing.
Yeah, please.
My dad owned one of the big wheel bicycles,
Oh.
and they were treacherous to ride. You just a little pebble in the road or on a sidewalk, if you hit that right, boy, you would just go right on over. And,
Exactly.
you know, just destroy your face. And it
Yeah.
was awful. I
Yeah.
never got on one. I've always been
Well, and even
careful.
before they had the rubber tires, you know, the pneumatics, they just had a wooden or iron wheel. They called it a bone shaker, you
Yeah.
know, for the same reason, because on a rough road, it was just, you know, rattle your teeth. So yeah, it had a lot of different names, and it was dangerous, very.
And
Did you,
those
did you
roads
hold,
were bad.
did you hold on to that bike?
Did I? No, he sold it.
Oh, that's too bad.
I
That's-
never rode it, you know,
Yeah.
there wasn't any. I love to look at it and everything, but it's just not for me.
Well, it was hard to get on it. You had to kind
I
of
know.
jump onto it from the back, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Had to
great.
be pretty limber.
Yeah.
I just can't thank you enough, Lauren. It was a great talk.
My pleasure. It was fun to put together.
Thank you.
Okay.